All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back on a Sunday morning at Sev Geff Live. Paul Severino and Glenn Geffner. Thanks, everybody, for joining us. We hope that everybody is safe and home and healthy and not going too stir-crazy. Geff, how are you doing today?
Hanging in there. Had a little extra time in hair and makeup today, so we're a couple of minutes late getting on the air. But, with each passing day, we're, I think, coming more and more to grips with the reality of what we're facing here and the fact that this isn't going to be over in
something that we've been working on.
That's right. We know not everybody has time to sit down and watch a full 45 minutes or an hour of the show, so we try to pull out a few minutes of the highlights of each episode that we've done so far. We rolled out our first SGL short with Tommy Hutton about a week or 10 days ago. We've got the latest with Tom Kohler, where TK took us on a tour of his baseball memorabilia collection. It was really cool. So you can go to our YouTube channel anytime and check out the full interviews or just pull out the shorts. And we'll be adding some additional content coming up in the days and weeks ahead as well.
All right, looking forward to that. Also, we're going to unveil, I guess would be the right word, our SGL mailbag, right, Kev?
Oh, we've asked people to send us their questions. If they have questions for you and me. We always take questions for our guest, but if folks have questions that are specific to you and me, they can send to us via Twitter, #SevGeffLive. We're going to have our first mailbag question toward the end of the show today. We've gotten some good ones already, so keep those coming.
Right, and we also have, Geff, our question of the day, which we will show you now. We'll also have thoughts on that a little bit later on in the program as well.
And this will be a good one we can get into with Dave a little bit also. My question today was, if you could have seen a game in any major league ballpark that's no longer in use, which ballpark would you choose? And for a lot of us, they're ballparks that we never got to in many cases. Some of the folks who've chimed in with responses said, hey, I used to watch games at the Polo Grounds. Would love to see another game there. I know of everybody you and I know, probably Dave has seen more games in more different ballparks than anybody, so it'll be fun to talk with him about that as well.
All right, well, let's welcome in our guest today. That is Dave Van Horne. He joins us right now. Dave, thanks for taking the time, buddy. How you doing?
Hey, guys, it's good to get out. Good to see you guys, and I see that you are recognizing all of the correct protocols for this time during the coronavirus episode, and it's really something, isn't it?
It is. It feels like, I don't know if it would, I'll ask you guys the same question. It feels like for me, it kind of hit home more in these last few days because it feels like, well, we should have been on the road by now. Like, you're still sleeping in your own bed for that first week of the season, but we should have been in Atlanta. We should be going to Washington, D.C. today. And again, everyone's health is first and foremost. I'm just talking from a baseball perspective, that this is where it kind of started to hit home that, hey, we don't have baseball and probably won't for a little while.
Well, I know that in my case, it's really different because this is not a labor issue. I was involved in every single labor issue that Major League Baseball had going back to 1972. So I remember stoppages in play, some longer than others, but never for this reason. And for this reason, we're looking at a worldwide pandemic, and it's very difficult to deal with because the last thing that's important right now is the game of sports that we've all known and loved, and they're not on television. They're not being played in all the venues across the world, let alone here in the United States, but all for the same purpose, and that is to get this thing under control and get it into the rearview mirror.
Well, the last time, Dave, you and I were together was March 12th. We were doing the Marlins-Cardinals spring game in Jupiter. The night before, the NBA had suspended the season. And we went on the air feeling like something's going to happen today. And over the course of the broadcast, things began to happen. There were rumors, there were reports, and there was an official announcement that when we wrapped up that game against the Cardinals, we were going to be done for a while. We've entered such an uncharted territory here. It's really strange. Even with labor stoppages, you feel as though from day to day things are moving a little bit, and maybe there's a chance you're going to be back sooner rather than later. Here, there's just so much uncertainty. We've talked a lot to several players and former players about how they're handling that. What are you up to these days as you try to pass the time and at the same time kind of stay sharp and stay ready?
Try to stay on top of the baseball stuff, of course, so a lot of time online to check the various sites and see what people are saying and what the prognosis for baseball looks like. And it's too early to even talk about the re-entry because we just don't know when that's going to be, whether it's going to be a month from now, 6 weeks from now, 8 weeks from now, or if we're going to have a season. We don't know the answer to any of those questions. We can just speculate. So that makes it a different kind of a situation here. But as far as keeping track of things, of course, the computer and the phone doing a pretty good job of that, and listening from time to time to see what other people say about it. But other than that, walking some, getting on the bike now and then, and doing some riding. Fortunately, in a position where I can get out back and sit on the patio and get some sunshine and do all those things without wandering too far from home. I've only been out a few times. We've only been out a few times. Jose's done such a good job of stocking the house. We don't have to go out that often. And fortunately, we're able to stay in and abide by all the protocols.
And just run low on anything, we're calling the Van Horns.
Absolutely. And just to clarify, when you say out on the bike, you talking Harley Davidson or like bicycle?
I wish Harley Davidson, but no, it's a bicycle. It's
bicycle.
A Schwinn.
Oh, okay, perfect. All right, fine.
We get out and ride around, and so that's one thing that I enjoy, getting outside, even though it's limited and can't go all that far.
Yeah, I mean, you hate to make light of it, but I think if there's something that's going to be good from all this, what we're going to get when all of this hopefully dust settles is a world where everyone respects other people's personal space. We all make sure to wash our hands, and we all exercise. So again, it sucks that we're going through this, but hopefully that's something that we can all learn going forward, is that get outside, get some fresh air, get off the couch a little bit, because it's like when you're forced to do it is when you don't want to do it. So
I think there are things that we've had to do as a result of following the protocols that will probably continue even when we get the all clear signal. I think for myself personally, I know I'm going to do a much better job of keeping my hands clean constantly, of using the various solutions to prevent germs from forming on my hands. Like everybody, you have a hard time staying away from touching your face because it's just something we all do all the time. But I think that's one thing that'll carry on. I'm interested in seeing what happens with the handshake. Have we seen the end of the handshake?
That's right. It goes back to medieval times. It may go away now, though.
Yeah, it's going to be a lot of elbow bumps. That's what we're going to be doing. But again, if that's what becomes of whatever our new normal is, then it is what it is. All right. So you kind of touched on it. You've seen an awful lot. Over 50 years as a broadcaster, Dave. What year number are we going into right now? Hopefully when 2020 starts, it'll be, what, 52, 3?
This will be 52.
52. My goodness. Did you ever think that you'd last that long? I mean, that it would be a job for that long, I guess.
No. Even going back to my first year, which was 1969, and sitting down in West Palm Beach and talking to John McHale. This was after I had been hired, and he said we're going to agree on a 1-year deal with a handshake. He said, because I have no idea where this thing is going to go. I don't know where we'll be. This is expansion. I don't know if this is going to work in Montreal. So let's go 1 year at a time for now. And so that's all I really knew in 1969 was 1 year. So to be able to sit here now and talk about over half a century, it's really mind-boggling for me.
I want to take you back even further than 52 years. You grew up in Easton, Pennsylvania. Where did your love for baseball, your passion for the game come from? How was that nurtured?
My dad and my uncle Walter, my parents are both New Englanders. My dad was born and raised in the Boston area, my mother in Vermont. So my dad was a terrific Boston Red Sox fan, big Ted Williams fan, and he really introduced me to the game and all the things that go with being a youngster. Then followed the collection of baseball cards, listening to baseball on the radio. I grew up in an era where there were 2 teams in Philadelphia. Both the Phillies and the A's played in Philly. There were still 3 teams in New York. And so I was surrounded within a 75-mile radius from a lot of baseball and started following it at that point.
I guess I say this knowing my own experience, was that I was young and naive, I don't know, 10, 11, 12 years old, and you hear the voices on TV and radio, and for me, I was young and dumb and I'm still dumb, but I was young and dumb and didn't know that like that was actually a job until a friend of mine that was, a family friend, he was a few years older, he was getting ready to go to college. And I said, what are you going to study in college? And he said, communications. I said, well, what is that? He goes, well, those guys that are talking on TV during a sports game, a baseball game, basketball game. He goes, well, they're broadcasters. And I was like, whoa, hang on a second. So that's like a job that you can do? And then it was like from that day on, it was like, all right, that's what I need to do. I want to talk about sports every day. And that's why I asked, like, did you know that it would last this long, that it would be a situation where, and I think you know what I mean when I say you never really had to get a real job.
I broke into radio as a full-time employee in the state of Virginia. First of all, briefly in Richmond, and then in Roanoke, Virginia. And my first opportunity to do play-by-play came in high school football and high school basketball. And that led to a telephone call from Richmond. I was out in Roanoke working at the time, had not done a single baseball game in my life, had thought about it, but never done baseball. And I got a call to go to Richmond to replace Frank Messer, great baseball broadcaster who went from Richmond to Baltimore. Then most baseball fans would probably remember him as one of the longtime voices of the New York Yankees. And I replaced Frank Messer in Richmond and got to do International League Baseball. And I wasn't 30 days into the first season, and then I had that moment that you had, Paul. Then I knew this is what I want to do. I enjoyed football and basketball, but it was baseball that really turned me on to radio broadcasting and sports broadcasting. And that's when I had that same moment. This is what I want to do. And of course, you want to do it at the highest level if that's possible.
We know how much baseball, the game, has changed since you started in Richmond and you got to Montreal for the inaugural season, '69. What about broadcasting baseball? How have you seen the art of broadcasting change over the course of these 52 years?
I think there have been a lot of changes, and they've come about slowly over the course of the 52 years, particularly when you compare radio to the telecast of baseball. When I first broke in, there were only a few teams that were really televising a lot of games. Some teams had a schedule of 25 games, 30 games, 40, 50 games. All of a sudden, the proliferation of baseball on television exploded. And it really changed things for the radio broadcasters, I believe. And one of the things that changed was the advent of communications. The telephone suddenly became fans' access to a scoreboard. If they wanted a score, they didn't have to sit and listen to my broadcast of the baseball game. All they had to do was look at their phone. They had all the scores. There was more information out there available to the public than ever before in the history of the game. I remember the days, and I'm sure some others out there will too, that when you got the Sunday paper, you went to the back page of the sports section to find out what all the stats were. Right. That's the day they were printed in the newspaper. And some of the magazines that were out at the time were of course, big sources of information on baseball. But in the day, I remember a fan telling me, 1969, 1970, said, I can walk through my neighborhood in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce in Montreal, and in NDG, I didn't have to have a radio with me. I could hear your voice coming from backyards, block after block. That's all changed. And I think the other thing that's changed a lot is the majority of our fans are coming in and out of the radio broadcasts often to check on the score, see what's happening in the game. Whereas in the early days of radio, fans followed the game from first pitch to the final out. So I've witnessed a lot of changes in that regard.
If that's how things have changed on the audience side of the speaker, what about on your side of the microphone, how things have changed? Has your philosophy changed? Has your prep changed? Any of that sort of stuff?
I don't think so. I mean, I realize that I'm still an old school broadcaster. I try to stay on top of the action, pitch by pitch, and follow the ball. I remember John McHale telling me in 1969, don't ever take your eyes off the ball. As long as it's a live ball, keep your eyes on that ball, and you'll know what's happening in the game. Things have changed. I probably do, and Geff does as well. More recapping of the game mid-game. Maybe every 3 or 4 innings, we're kind of recapping how all of these scores came about. Whereas back in the day, we just assumed that everybody listened from first pitch to final out, and we didn't have to catch them up on anything. Now you've got to catch people up. Those people that are driving maybe on I-95 and they've got you on for an hour or so, and they want to know how it came to be that it's a 5-2 game. And so you need to run through that for them. And that's changed a lot, I think, keeping track of those things on the broadcast to fill in the listener that is in and out of the broadcast.
You've done a decent amount of TV over the years. We know that in 2020, the majority of fans consume their baseball on the television. What's so magical about baseball on the radio for you?
Well, I think it's the broadcaster's medium for baseball. I think that in all honesty, I have felt for years that the television broadcast is a producer's and analyst's medium. And the play-by-play guy is there to kind of direct traffic and keep things moving and see that all of those things go smoothly. But it's a producer and direct and analyst medium. Excuse me. Radio, you're everything. You are the producer, the director, the analyst. You do everything, and I think that's the big difference.
Yeah, I tell people all the time, we have 4 eyes in our booth, your 2 and my 2, right. And if one of us doesn't see something that happens, it didn't happen as far as the listener's concerned.
Right, and that's the other thing too. And with on the TV side of things, oftentimes, not too often, but sometimes, just because there are pictures to go along with it, Todd and I don't have to necessarily talk or describe that pitch that was outside by 1.5 feet. You see it. So we'll just let the game breathe a little bit, and whether it's spring training games, I pop into the booth to say hello and maybe do a half inning or an inning with you guys. You have to be cognizant that you're speaking in much shorter bursts on the radio because you have to stick with every single pitch.
And you might describe a ground ball to shortstop in 8 words,
right?
And Dave and I will do it in 42 words,
right?
Because it's a 2-hopper to the backhand side. He plants, he throws, and he's out by a step at first base, as opposed to shortstop, 2 down,
right?
Something like that.
Yeah,
it's a totally different broadcast.
Yeah, it is.
Sure. There are times, as you know, Paul, where if you're in the middle of a story or some repartee back and forth with your partner, you don't have to stop that for every pitch.
Right.
Because the viewer is seeing every pitch. Well, we need to stop mid-story and sometimes mid-sentence to call a pitch. And if that pitch is put into play, to finish that whole play before we get back to what it is we were talking about. So it's a different media and commands a different attitude from your broadcaster.
Yeah, and actually, honestly, that's what Geff and I have talked about earlier this week. That's why we've kind of enjoyed what we're doing with this little thing that we're doing, because we're not having to step aside for that double in the gap or whatever. We can just kind of keep the conversation going. So it's been fun. I looked up your history and went all the way back to high school, Dave, and you were in the drama club back in the day. And I just wonder how much that may have played into what we all do, because again, we're all about telling the story and engaging the audience, and whether that's play-by-play or drama, you kind of have to do that. Did you see that back in the day? Do you still see that now?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, excuse me, I pursued that when I went to college. I went to RPI, Richmond Professional Institute. You know it now as VCU. I went there because they had a radio and television department. I would find out soon at that school that it wasn't a very big and it wasn't a very good department, but God bless them, they got me started. I took voice and diction classes, acting classes certainly came into play. The use of the voice, the ups and downs, and the things that we do to call a play, to make a play easily observed by the person at home who can't see the ball game. But they can see it in their mind as a result of what you're talking about, your inflection of voice and so forth. So that helped me a lot. And I went to that school not just for radio and TV, because they had a department. I went there, but I was really interested in drama, and I thought that I might pursue that. And then I saw some of the graduates from the drama school coming back from New York after serving their time as waiters, waitresses, busboys, scrambling to 8 people in an apartment trying to share, because they didn't have the money to pay, and that kind of scared me off. Said, there's not a whole lot of money in this acting business. Maybe I
sounds
better
like a ball player, working his way up to the minor leagues.
Yeah, and then fortunately, I got a chance, of course, to do sports and to eventually do baseball, and that led to the career. But there was no doubt in my mind that, as I mentioned earlier, 30 days into my first year of broadcasting baseball, which was 1966, and 30 days into that, I just knew this is what I want to do. I don't want to ever stop doing this.
Right.
Can we get you to sing a little Les Mis or something for us here today? One day more.
As you can tell, I've had a little issue here with Sinatra, so
all right.
I think I'll pass on.
Very convenient, Dave. Very convenient.
I will tell you that. I did see it 5 times.
Nice.
Yeah, I know that's one of your if not number one on your list, right?
Yeah, I think Les Mis probably still ranks as number 1, but some of the shows that I saw early on when I first started going to see Broadway shows have stuck with me for years. Shows like Lil Abner, which nobody would recognize today as a popular show, because Little Abner ceased to be a cartoon in the daily newspapers, and nobody knows anything about Little Abner today. But I still remember very well that show. The star who played Little Abner, by the way, was Peter Palmer. Peter Palmer was a terrific athlete at USC. And had a good voice. As a matter of fact, he was on the USC football team, but he also sang the national anthem a few times in his football uniform prior to some games. At any rate, he wound up playing the lead of Little Abner on Broadway. So that stuck with me, and that began my love of Broadway, which I still share, of course, with my partner, Geff. We both love Broadway shows, and I know you do as well, Paul.
Yeah, I haven't been
to night
to
off
many.
On New York.
Yeah, that's the only thing. I do regret not having gone to so many, having lived in New Jersey for 7 years that we lived there when I was with MLB Network. But I got a young kid and everything else. It was tough to get there. But it is again, it's what we do. It's live performances, and things can go wrong. And part of the art of what we do, what actors on Broadway do, is things go wrong, and how well do you hide it from the audience? I think that's part of it. Our microphones might go out, or the audio might go out, or the graphic doesn't pop up, the replay doesn't show up when you're supposed to. You lose power. All these little things, and it's all about how you hide it from the audience. And again, the show must go on, right? Or
on radio, where you're there every moment, every pitch throughout the game, and you have a brain cramp over a play, or over a pitch, or what's happening in the game, and you're trying to figure out, how can I make the best of this? Should I just go on and pretend that nobody will notice, or do I need to recap this thing? And there's some adjustments to be made on the fly.
You mentioned your passion for the theater, doing what you've done as long as you've done it, the level you've done it, and particularly with some of the partners you've worked with over the years. Don Drysdale comes to mind. You've had the chance to run into some people over the years and spend some time with some fascinating people outside of the realm of baseball over the years. There's one Don Drysdale story I've heard you tell, not many have, and I hope you're going to think of the exact same story and you can share it with us, about the night Don Drysdale forced you to go out after a ball game.
Okay. Don was my first television partner. So I broke in grand style with Don Drysdale. I was 3 years into Expos games, and Don was my partner. So we were in New York to do a Saturday afternoon game, the Expos and the Mets. The game was over. We're in a cab on the way back downtown to our hotel, which was, of course, in Midtown Manhattan. And he said, "What have you got planned for tonight?" And I said, "I have no plans." He said, "Well, when we get back to the hotel," he said, "take that funny-looking jacket off, because we both wore these uniform jackets for television." He said, "Get changed into something comfortable and meet me down in the lobby 15 minutes later." So I did. We jumped in a cab. And I said, "Where are we going?" He said, "You'll enjoy this." And we started heading south in Manhattan and down into a great area of Manhattan, almost down to the Statue. And we stopped at this restaurant. The door opened up, and the doorman knew Don, opened it up and said, "Right this way, sir." We walked in. It's about 11 o'clock, 11:15 at night. Place was jam-packed. And we're making our way through the crowd, and all of a sudden, I see a white napkin come flying right at Don Drysdale, hit him right in the face, and I said, "Oh no, we're going to have an awful time here. Somebody's upset with Drysdale and threw his napkin at him." Well, that wasn't what he was upset about. He wasn't upset at all. He just laughed it off. And when he pulled the napkin down, we had reached the back of the restaurant. There was a little table back there, and the fellow who threw the napkin stood up, put his hand out, and shook hands with Don, gave him a great big hug. And as soon as they broke from that embrace, Don turned to me and said, "Dave, this is my friend Frank Sinatra. Frank, this is my partner, Dave Van Horne." And of course, as soon as I got to see him, I knew exactly who it was. And it was one of the great nights for me in baseball to sit and listen to Don Drysdale and Frank Sinatra tell all these stories about their days. Of course, the Dodgers, they were Hollywood's team. They were active in Las Vegas. And to listen to those stories for 2.5 or 3 hours was just one of the thrills of my career.
Yeah.
Probably had a glass of wine or two that night also, I'm guessing.
Well, I had a glass or two. It happened to be BO and water. When the waiter came to the table, as soon as Don and I sat down, he said, "I'll take drink orders." And Sinatra said to me, he said, "What do you drink?" And I said, "BO and water will be fine." Well, 3 minutes later, a bottle of BO, a glass, a bucket of ice, and a pitcher of water arrived in front of me. Same thing for Don for his drink, and Sinatra for his. I thought we might be here for a while.
I got to talk to Hollingsworth. He never introduces me to people like Frank Sinatra. What the heck is going on here? That's amazing. And that's always fascinating when, I mean, for us, we're broadcasters. We're supposed to talk. We're supposed to lead the conversation. But I love the fact, and I'm doing this right now. I do this if, we grab a bite to eat on the road, just to sit back and listen and not be the one talking. There's so much to be learned from those stories sometimes. And I'm sure few have had greater stories than Frank Sinatra.
No question. You remember, both of you, I'm sure, remember when Mickey Mantle opened up Mantle's restaurant there on South Central Park. One day, Duke said to me, he said, "You have lunch plans?" I said, "No." He said, "Well, come with me." He said, "We're going over to Mickey's. He just opened up a week or so ago, and he said he's invited us over for lunch." And the same thing happened there. I sat and listened to Mickey Mantle and Duke Snider, not only New York icons, but Major League Baseball icons everywhere around the world, tell stories of their days back in the 50s when the Dodgers, of course, were in Brooklyn and Mickey was the star of the New York Yankees. And just to listen to them tell their stories was, again, one of those experiences. I don't think I've said 2 words during that whole time we sat. I just listened to the Mick and the Duke.
Right.
Willie Mays is unavailable apparently that day. You could have the threesome.
Got to meet Willie through Felipe Alou. Felipe Alou, a longtime Giant and a longtime friend and teammate of Willie Mays. And Willie would, whenever Montreal was playing in San Francisco, Willie would stop by the manager's office and sit early before things started up out on the field and talk with Felipe. And a couple of times Felipe would invite me in, and that was the same thing, listening to Felipe Alou and Willie Mays talk about their days on the field together with the New York and San Francisco Giants.
Yeah.
In 52 years of doing this, was Willie Mays the greatest ball player you've seen, or is there somebody else?
Well, I got to see Willie Mays. I got to see Roberto Clemente, and in both cases at the end of their careers. I did see that Willie collected his 3,000th hit against the Expos. I got to call that and see that. I would say, even though their best playing days were behind them, they might have been the two, and then I would add a third, Henry Aaron. Got to see Henry Aaron when he was still hitting the long ball. And if you stay around long enough in the game, you're going to see a lot of wonderful people. And that's been the big thrill for me as a broadcaster for over half a century, to watch people like that. Even though in some cases Willie and Roberto come to mind, it was right at the end of their careers.
It's you say if you stick around long enough, you'll meet a lot of people or see a lot of great players, but you'll also get to be a part of, and really a large part when you think back at history and seeing the videos and listening to the calls, you get your own little piece of the player's history as well. And whether it's Willie Mays' 3,000th hit, just jotted a couple down, Pete Rose's 4,000th hit, Dennis Martinez with a perfect game, the Marlins winning a World Series. When you're behind the microphone for those moments, that whether it's a hit that you can kind of see coming, he's sitting on 29.99 or what have you, you know that it's coming. What's going through your head as a broadcaster?
Set the stage for what you're seeing for your listener and stay out of the way. Don't think that you have to become a part of this historic moment. Stay out of the way, but don't cheat the listener. Make sure they are able to hear about everything that's going on in this moment. When you get down to the last inning of a no-hit bid and it turns out to be a no-hitter, and whatever the case may be. In the case of perfect games, I've done three of the perfect games. And the same thing I told myself, whether I was doing television or radio, the El Presidente El Perfecto call was a television call. I was doing that game in Los Angeles, Expos against the Dodgers. Dennis Martinez on the mound for the Expos. My partner was Ken Singleton. And it was amazing. As soon as I called that last out and said El Presidente El Perfecto, Ken and I went a good minute and a half, 2 minutes, and didn't say a single word. We just let the director take all the pictures that needed to be taken to show the celebration on the field at Dodger Stadium.
Speaking of great calls you've made over the years, we got a viewer question. Our friend Raul, who listens to all the games on the radio in Santa Clara, Cuba, Jose Fernandez's hometown, he asked on Facebook, he wants to hear the story behind your up, and away home run call.
Oh, that took place in the early years in Montreal. On the post-game show, of course, we'd play a lot of highlights from the game, and I noticed that my partner, who was the late, great Russ Taylor, was my radio partner there. I said, our calls for home runs, for whatever reason, sound very similar. I should come up with something as a home run call. That night, driving home, I had on one of the local Montreal stations that played top 40 stuff. And here comes this song, Up, and Away. by the fifth edition. And I thought about Up, Up, and Away, and I said, maybe that'll work. So I tried it starting the next night. I don't know if I was going to use it just for home team home runs. I don't know if they hit one that night, but as soon as they hit a home run, I gave that a try. And I tried it a few more times, and then I didn't hear from anybody about it, and I stopped. After maybe a half a dozen games, I just stopped. I said, I've got to come up with something else. And several people who were with the ball club said, why have you stopped Up, Up, and Away? We thought it was terrific. Then I started to get a few postcards and a few letters from fans saying the same thing. So I went back to it, and it's still there. It's still part of what I do.
And I know around the time you got the Frick Award, you actually got to connect with the Fifth Dimension, right, and talk to them about the origin of the call?
Yes, I got a nice letter from their agent who said they're tickled to death that you use Up, Up, and Away as a call, and I sent a recording, a tape recording at the time of several of the home run calls using Up, Up, and Away. And got a nice note back from them, and it was special. It was nice to hear from them and have them recognize the fact that they too like the call.
Yeah, and that's a lot of people have asked me that too. I mean, whenever we start 2020, it'll be my third year with the team, and people ask me all the time, "Are you going to come up with a signature home run call?" And if it happens, I guess it happens. But yours is great because it's simple and it's timeless and it's classic and it's not anything that's too cute. Some people will.
It's not contrived,
right? It's free and it's light and I love it, and that's the thing, and it doesn't seem forced either, which is great.
And every once in a while, no matter what your call, you'll get caught on a line drive home run that leaves the ballpark in about 2.3 seconds, and I don't recover in time to use the home run call because it's not one of those majestic high fly balls that add to the ability to use that call. So there are a couple of times each year that I'll call a Marlins home run and I won't use that call. Usually it's because of how quickly the ball got out, or it looked like to me that it might be a catchable ball, and I see the outfielder going up high on the outfield wall,
right,
trying to catch on the ball. And of course, the worst thing that can happen, I'd rather have the ball be a home run and I didn't use the call than use the call and then find out the ball was caught.
Right. The line drives are just up and away. They're not up and away. It's just one up.
Just one up.
Exactly. Yeah. That's when some of those calls like out of here come in handy.
Right.
You mentioned Felipe Alou's name earlier. You talk a lot about Gene Mauch, who you were with in Montreal for a long time. I know they were two huge influences on you over the course of your career. Who are some of the other people, and for what reason do you look at some of these people as great influences in your development as a broadcaster and as a real student of the game?
Well, it's a fairly easy question to answer, although a lot of people have had some kind of an effect, mostly all positive, on my broadcast career. But in listening to other broadcasters, we all pick up little things here and there from listening to other broadcasters, which I did very early in my career a lot. But at the same time, tried to stay within myself and not try to imitate broadcasters I was listening to. Just pick up some good pointers from them by listening. I've been blessed throughout my career with terrific partners: Don Drysdale, Duke Snider, Ken Singleton, just to name a few. Gary Carter and I did television together for 3 years. He was with me on the David Cohn perfect game at Yankee Stadium against Montreal. Gary was part of that telecast. I've just been really blessed to have terrific people to lean on through the years. And still to this day, I have a broadcaster that sits beside me that I lean on a lot.
We lean on each other a lot.
So I've been very fortunate in that regard. I think early on, when we're all young broadcasters, we're getting a lot of advice from a lot of people. There's a name that not too many people would know, Gene Kirby. Gene Kirby was a longtime baseball man. He worked for a lot of clubs as a director of broadcasting. Even going back into the 50s, Gene Kirby was the producer for the Dizzy Dean Pee Wee Reese telecasts on CBS television. So here's a terrific man, well-versed in broadcasting, both radio and TV. And he was part of the Expos front office in my early years as well. So he was a great asset, and he was a terrific coach. So I've been aided by a lot of good people.
Yeah. For the young broadcaster who's out there watching this today, high school, college, minor league, what's the best piece of advice you can offer him or her as they begin their journey?
Do games. Simply put, you got to find a way to do games. Before my first season, I took a tape recorder in Richmond and went out and sat on the grass under a tree at Bird Park and did American Legion baseball games. I didn't know who the players were, but I used box scores from the newspaper and gave them all major league names, and I would have a game between the Philadelphia Phillies and the St. Louis Cardinals. And I would broadcast that game into the tape. Then I would take it back to my boss, who was a baseball broadcaster, Frank Soden in Richmond, and he and I would sit and listen, or he'd take it home or in the car and pop the cassette in and listen and help me out. The year before I started broadcasting baseball, that was in 1965. Any way that you can do games is really the secret. It's not the easiest thing in the world to do. But if you use your imagination and you think about it, there are ways you can do a game without being in the broadcast booth up there behind home plate. If you're lucky enough to know some people on the local team and they give you a space upstairs and you can broadcast there, fine. But no matter what you have to do, you've got to do games. I think one of the best entries these days, because there's so many colleges that are out there, Geff, as you know, with really good broadcast departments. Sports broadcasting, specialize in sports broadcasting, and most of those youngsters that are going to those schools get an opportunity to do not just baseball, but a lot of sports. I mean, they might be doing intramural sports, but they get to do a lot collegiately. There's a terrific list. I'm sure Geff's list would be headed by Northwestern.
It's first, second, fifth, seventh, and ninth on his list.
There are a lot of broadcasters that you've talked to, Paul. They're going to talk about Syracuse.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of schools. I made note of a couple of them. And Geff, I don't know if you'd agree with this whole list, but they tell me that Kansas has a terrific broadcast department. Arizona State, Penn State, Ohio State, UM. Mm-hmm. UM, for those in Florida, it might be number one, although UF has a pretty good program as well. And then I was just reading the other day about a school in Boston, a small school. You don't hear them mentioned with the others, but a small school, Emerson College. And they say that Emerson College has as good a program as some of the larger schools. And the quote from the writer of the article said, including Syracuse.
Yeah.
So there are schools out there that have some wonderful programs, and it's a terrific start for a young man who wants to broadcast. And you know what? There might be young players young broadcasters out there that want to be baseball broadcasters. If they do enough sports, they might find something else they enjoy doing. Maybe they enjoy doing all three, and they want to take a shot at the avenues that they can follow that do a lot of games in a lot of sports, and that takes a special talent. But that's something else that can. The door is open to that in college broadcasting.
You mentioned Emerson. A friend of mine runs a sports communications program at Emerson. The big thing is more than what goes on in the classroom, though, to your initial point, Dave, is you want to go somewhere where you can get on the air and, as you said, do games, because there's only so much you can learn in a classroom.
Right.
Yeah, and of course, for years we said, well, scout around in the minor leagues, see if you can find a minor league job. It's not as easy as it sounds. A lot of teams in the low minors don't broadcast their games. Some do, but not all do. You get up to the AA level, you find more broadcast opportunities. You get to AAA, and there are more broadcast opportunities there. But there's a long lineup of people, as we all know, waiting for those jobs to open up. So you've really got to introduce yourself to the system, make as many contacts as you can with major league teams, and stay in their ear and apply for jobs. And maybe you'll be one of those lucky young broadcasters that get a job doing a minor league season. And then you're going to find out whether you really love the game enough and love baseball broadcasting enough to stay with it once you've done a full season.
Right. And one thing that I would add, too, as someone who didn't go to one of those big schools, is that, and Dave makes obviously a terrific point on those big schools, but you can also make your own opportunities in a sense. Like, I went to Endicott College, and one of the reasons why I went there, in the interest of full disclosure, because I was extremely lazy to look for other schools. I saw that this school was across the street from the beach. Little did I know, the North Shore of Boston is not a place that you're often going to the beach in November and February when you're there. However, they had a great internship program, and I did internships as a freshman, as a sophomore, worked for the TV station as a junior, a semester-long internship as a senior, another one after school. So the big schools are great, and they're great atmospheres. You go to Syracuse, you might see a great football game, basketball game. Missouri, same thing. But if you are at the smaller schools, you might be able to establish something a little bit as opposed to just be the next guy in line. And obviously times have changed a little bit, but when I was in college as a junior, we were just put in a football stadium. And I said, well, why aren't we broadcasting games at the football stadium? So the people that wanted to do the behind-the-scenes stuff, they got an opportunity to figure out, how do we run cables from this place to that place, and how can we broadcast this live? So there are different ways, and the big schools are fantastic. The small schools have great opportunities too. It's really just all in what you make of it. So that's my piece
now
of
more
advice.
than ever, you have the opportunity to create your own opportunities, as you alluded to, Paul. Right. With all the technology out there, you can put games online. You can go to your athletic department and say, hey, why aren't the men's hockey games being broadcast on the radio? Why aren't women's basketball games maybe on the radio? I'll do them. And all you need is a laptop, a little bit of technology, and you can get those games out there. And I know students who've done that at various schools across the country and launched their own careers by taking that initiative.
And be ready to speak up when someone says, we need somebody to do this, no matter what it is, no matter what sport, seize the opportunity. And I can speak from personal experience there, and I'm not sure that I've ever told you the story, Geff. It'll be a quick one. But I was working at a radio station, the old CBS station in Roanoke, Virginia, WDBJ. And I was working there, and several of us, staff announcers, were out in the hallway talking, and the general manager walked through, and he looked like he was about to fight somebody, and he said, can anybody here do a football game? And I looked at the other guys, nobody spoke up, and I said, yeah, I'll do it. And he said, fine, because I just fired Bill Spar, who was the station's football broadcaster. And he walked back to his office, and the other guys looked at me and said, are you crazy? Have you ever done play-by-play or a football game? I said, no, but I'll figure it out.
Yeah.
And so, again, speak up when you get an opportunity. It might not be what you plan for, but if it's an opportunity to be behind the microphone and doing a sport, do it.
Yeah. And if you believe in miracles, I say that, right? Al Michaels was a guy who, going into the Olympics, had like this much hockey experience, but it was more than anybody else. And he's now, author of one of the great calls in sports broadcasting history. Do you believe in miracles?
Absolutely.
Yes. So yeah, you make the most of your opportunities. We, Dave, you are the lucky debut guest of our new little hit and run segment of our guest episodes here.
Disappearing from baseball.
That's right.
We're bringing it back.
This will be a comeback.
We're bringing it back. The idea is kind of some quick-hitting questions, rapid-fire responses. Then we let you run at the end of making the hits here. So here we go. It's our debut of Hit and Run with Dave Van Horne. Dave, your perfect day off on the road. Where are you and what are you doing?
Well, the perfect day off would be New York City. Go to somewhere like Frankie and Johnny's down in the theater district and have a nice steak before. Go to a show, to see a Broadway show. And if I haven't eaten before the show, I'll be over at Gallagher's having one of those big giant steaks after the show. That to me is a great day. It gets you away from the game and gets you into a different venue, and that's what I enjoy. Number one on my list of days off on the road.
What's your favorite road ballpark to work in?
That's a tough question because there are many, but I've always enjoyed working in Wrigley because of the history of the ballpark and the atmosphere within the ballpark, more often than not, packed with fans. Same is true of Dodger Stadium. Great history, a great pitcher's ballpark, steeped in pitching history there. I like both of those a lot. But at the same time, as Geff knows and as Paul knows, as far as our working conditions at Wrigley Field, they leave a lot to be desired. But
not ideal for social distancing.
Yes. It's impossible to set up for social distancing in the broadcast booth at Wrigley. But the atmosphere is electric. I miss the old rock and roll atmosphere at Shea Stadium when we go in there to play the Mets. It's still a nice venue for the fans, but I miss that atmosphere at Shea.
Shea shook. You actually felt the ballpark shake on a Friday night, a Saturday night. Yeah, you could feel it for sure. We're going to miss Gary Pressey when we get to Wrigley Field this year also, the legendary Wrigley Field organist for decades who has just retired since the end of last season. Give me the sport other than baseball that you would enjoy broadcasting.
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed basketball. I enjoyed football as well, but I really missed, for the first few years that I was doing just baseball, I really missed basketball broadcasting a lot. As far as a sport that I had never done, that I wish I had done somewhere along the line, and of course I had no opportunity in Montreal, but I would love to have done hockey.
The two extremes, baseball and hockey. I did a hockey tournament. Those are the two extremes. Baseball, you've got a lot of downtime, and hockey, you don't have time to think. It's unbelievable. No,
hockey, you have none. And on radio, you have very little time. In basketball, you have very little time as well on radio. But certainly, hockey is one sport I wish I had been able to do early in my career.
All right, this is a tough one. Go all the way back to the beginning of time in baseball. Is there one game that you didn't call that you wish you could have called?
Oh, wow.
Should have given you a little notice on this one.
Now, how far back are we going?
Beginning of time. Any time you want.
Back in the 1800s, huh?
You can do that, yeah. Don't know how big your listenership would have been, but...
Yeah. I'm going to be fairly general in this answer, but I would love to have been in Yankee Stadium during the 1920s and seen Babe Ruth for a season and Gehrig and those great Yankee teams. I think if there's a place that I could go back to, it would be the 1920s and Yankee Stadium.
Okay, we're going to let you go with this one. The most memorable call that you've made in your career.
Well, probably the perfect game pitched by Dennis and El Presidente, El Perfecto, because it's the one call that I've made in over a half a century to where people still come up to me and comment on that call, and that they either heard it by replay or they were listening live, and so I'm very, very proud of that. I was also very proud of the call on Jeff Conine's throw to home plate to Pudge Rodriguez to get JT Snow in that division series, too.
No question. Where did the El Presidente El Perfecto come from? Is there a story behind that?
It's kind of crazy because I'm not one who writes down things that I'm going to say on little Post-it notes and put them up all over the place and then use them if they come into play. I don't plan on that. But after the top of the 8th inning, I was thinking, if he pulls this off, what am I going to do? And I got to thinking about the great history in this ballpark of terrific pitching and everything. And I thought about Vin Scully, and I thought, got to keep it simple and get out of the way of the moment. And I thought back to my early days of listening to baseball on the radio, and in games out of New York and out of Philadelphia, there were always ads for El Producto cigars. For some crazy reason, El Producto popped into my mind in those few seconds, and so I paused my thought process for a moment, and I thought, well, Dennis's nickname is El Presidente. What about? I couldn't do El Producto. That wouldn't make sense. But how about El Perfecto? And so I put the two together, and probably in a thought process of maybe 30 seconds, and said, if he pulls this off, that's where I'm going to go.
Yeah.
And the rest is history, and so is our first hit and run segment.
That's right. DVH, clearly we could go on and on and on. We'll save some of it for the buses and the planes, and when I pop into your guys' booth at 4:15 on a game day, and hopefully those game days come sooner rather than later. Continue to stay home, stay safe, stay healthy, and give my best to the family. I'm sure Geff has the same sentiments there.
Will do, and thoughts to your families as well. Thanks, guys. I enjoyed it.
All right.
That's great. Thank you, Dave.
DVH, we appreciate the time. Geff, again, there's so much more on the table, I'm sure, over 50 years of broadcasting there. And, one thing that Dave was talking about that kind of brought it to my mind, you talk with other broadcasters as you're feeling your way around, as I did in my first couple of years, was, when we would see teams for the first or maybe the second time, depending on time, and go into other booths and just kind of get in their minds. And I remember that Chip Carey, when I went in to talk with Chip before a Marlins Braves game, he looked through the glass and he said, if you don't go over there and talk to Dave Van Horne and get everything out of his brain, you're doing it wrong. And again, there's 50 years worth of experience there, and great calls and all kinds of stuff. So again, it's always a thrill to talk with DVH.
Yeah, he's seen it all. He's done it all over 52 years. And as you know, there are a lot of egos in this business, and there are a lot of people that people might not say, hey, you got to go down the hall and talk to that guy. Dave is one person without ego, and it's been a privilege for me now going into our 13th year working together. I've been very blessed. I started in San Diego and was able to work with Jerry Coleman and Ted Leitner there, with Joe Castiglione with the Boston Red Sox, with Dave here. Jerry's a Hall of Fame broadcaster. Dave is a Hall of Fame broadcaster. Joe Castiglione in Boston ought to be, and he will be one of these years before too long. But I've been very fortunate, certainly over these last 13 years with Dave, to have heard a lot of these stories over the course of broadcasts or dinners or, like you said, bus rides and plane rides, whatever it may be. And just to be around him, to see the respect that everybody in the industry has for him, broadcasters, managers, front office executives, players, and other teams. It really is a privilege going to work every day with Dave.
Yeah, no question about it. All right, we also have our first Sev Geff Live mailbag today, Geff. So
it's a day of first. On the mailbag today.
What's on the mailbag today? So again, we want folks to throw them our way. Use the hashtag Sev Geff Live. Whatever you want. You had thrown it out. I got the screen up now. Info on the baseball broadcasting business, life on the road. You had mentioned favorite episode of The Office. I later added Seinfeld as well. We're open to all of it. But we have one here.
I'm a Seinfeld guy first and foremost.
Right, okay.
Office most recently, but Seinfeld first and foremost.
Right, perfect. So we've got one here from Dr. Guava. I have a question. Which other local broadcasters would you listen to if you had the chance? having the Major League Baseball blackout here in North Carolina. I get to listen to the Reds, Braves, Nats, and Orioles broadcast while playing the Marlins. My favorites are the Reds. They are prepared to discuss both teams. Terrific question. We appreciate that. We, again, got a lot of responses, and we'll sprinkle them in as we continue to go here. I will offer it up to you first, Geff. Who are some of your favorite local broadcasters?
All right. Well, I'm going to start by saying this. We're so blessed to live in a time where you can listen to any broadcast you want on your iPhone or on SiriusXM or through MLB.com. When I first got out of college in 1990 and began working in AAA in Rochester, New York, what I did was I sent cassette tapes in that day to Northwestern friends of mine all across the country and said, hey, can you just record a couple of innings of your hometown guy calling a major league game at some point and send it back to me? That was what I had to do to listen to a lot of national broadcasters back in that day. Now you can listen to anybody you want. I'm going to give you 3 names I enjoy listening to on the radio, and we'll turn to you for TV a little bit. Dr. Guava mentioned he listens to the Reds a lot, and I am one of many mourning the retirement at the end of last season of Marty Brennaman in Cincinnati. I loved listening to Marty Brennaman. Marty was the voice of the Reds forever and ever and ever for decades. He's a Hall of Fame broadcaster, a guy who would tell it like it is at all times. He wasn't afraid to maybe ruffle some feathers on the ball club or in the front office. And the thing that really stood out to me about Marty was the voice, not the classic, the Dave Van Horn voice, the John Miller type voice, but he had a voice that was so distinctive to the game of baseball, kind of like Ernie Harwell, a little bit of a southern drawl to it, just a little. You hear that voice, you think baseball. I loved listening to Marty Brennaman broadcast games. If I was flipping around on XM and I heard Marty's voice, I would stop and listen there. Number 2, I'm going to stay in the state of Ohio. I love listening to the voice of the Indians, Tom Hamilton, on the radio. Tom's passion for the game is unsurpassed.
Unmatched, yes.
He will pull a hamstring on a home run in the second inning of a spring training game. I just love listening to Tom. He knows the game inside and out. He is such a good broadcaster and truly one of the nicest guys in the business as well. So Tom's number 2 on my list. And number 3, certainly present company excluded with Dave, but of out-of-town broadcasters, a guy I worked with previously in Boston, Joe Castiglione. Another guy who may not have the classic broadcaster voice, but is technically so good, who's so passionate for the game, who is so prepared each and every night. I love listening to Joe Castig in Boston.
Yeah, the terrific choices there. I love those all. I'm with you on that. I will. I'll also give 3, and I'll piggyback where you're at too. Marty's son, Tom Brennaman, in Cincinnati. Again, he's got that same voice, and he's got a voice. And again, maybe it's just by happenstance from the NFL games or other things that he's called, but you listen to him and it feels like it's a big game. He's got that big game type voice. I love listening to Tommy Brennaman. Also in the National League Central, I like a guy like Brian Anderson with the Milwaukee Brewers. I think, again, he's smooth, he's to the point, he's fantastic. And out in San Francisco, that whole, and I've gone into their booth and told all 4 of these guys that, whether it's Dave Fleming, John Miller, Kuiper, Krukow, I don't know, other than in South Florida, if there is a better group of 4, no, in all seriousness, a better group of 4 broadcasters, and they all kind of interchange the broadcast. Sometimes it's on radio, TV, they all move around, but to listen to those guys, it's pleasant because they make it sound and feel like you're watching the game with them as opposed to them broadcasting a game to you. And I think that that's what a lot of us strive for, or maybe even should strive for, is that connection between not just being the in-between between the game and the fan as the broadcaster, but also bringing the viewer in or the listener in. And I think that those guys in San Francisco do a great job. That's just 3. There's only 30 of these TV jobs to go around, and I think that each one of the 30 or 29 other, I guess, are fantastic. I'm sure we can go on and on with that. But one of the things... You
mentioned Brian Anderson. I want to chime in on Brian Anderson for a second, who you did TV guy, so I didn't mention Brian. If I were doing TV, I would have started with Brian Anderson, who folks have seen do Major League Baseball. He calls the Brewers games. He does some network postseason games. He's done NBA. He does college basketball. He does golf. For me, and I've said this to Brian, he's at CBS and TBS. When the day comes that Jim Nantz were to step away, for me, Brian Anderson is that guy who moves into that Jim Nantz role at CBS, who should be doing the Final Four, who should be doing the Super Bowl on CBS. That's how good a broadcaster I think Brian Anderson is.
Yeah, he's fantastic and really a great guy, too. And I think that the behind the scenes, the off camera, the off mic stuff that a lot of people don't get to see, I'm not just saying this, you can vouch for it, too. He is one of, if not the nicest guys in the broadcasting world. One other little bit of news, I guess, news-ish, was that the Marlins released a picture of the new surface and at Marlins Park, and we're all just like you. We're waiting to see it live and in person. But from the pictures that we have seen, it looks fantastic, Geff.
The new synthetic grass at Marlins Park coming in 2020. It's not artificial turf. There's a difference. This is not AstroTurf. This isn't the stuff that you used to see in the 70s and 80s and players destroyed their knees playing on. This is grass, but it's synthetic grass. It plays just like grass. A lot of people have asked the question, why do the Marlins need to go to artificial turf? Kyle Seeloff did a great Beyond the Bases podcast with Jeff King, who's the Marlins vice president of ballpark operations at Marlins Park. If you want to look for that podcast, it just came out this week, where Jeff explained a lot of what went into choosing this surface, and it's really very interesting stuff. The bottom line is, one, it's hard to grow and maintain healthy grass in the South Florida climate in a ballpark with a retractable roof, where you need enough direct sunlight and enough rainwater on the field on a daily basis. But you can't have too much sunlight or too much rainwater. You got to get the roof closed to cool down the ballpark for the fans before they come in every night. So this is a surface that, unlike the grass they've had in the past, they've gone through several variations. You can maintain, and at the end of the season, it's going to play exactly the same way it does at the beginning of the season. It's going to be better for the players, more consistent. It's going to be good for them health-wise. And it looks beautiful. And if you notice in the picture that we all tweeted out within the last few days, it actually looks as though they've mowed the pattern into it,
right.
But they have two different shades of green side by side, so it looks like there's a pattern mode into it. That's not the case. But a lot of very interesting details about this new synthetic grass playing surface at Marlins Park. If you listen to that Beyond the Bases podcast, marlins.com/podcasts, one of Kyle Seeloff's more interesting chats with Jeff King this week.
Right, and if you think that it's just go to the hardware store, buy a carpet, and roll it out, and you're done, it's way more than that. I mean, not just the different layers that they had to build to get to the final product here, but also the design, as Geff mentioned, was, I didn't even realize that this was a thing till I listened to the podcast, but there were 7 different shades of green that they had to choose from, and then how does it play with the lights and sunlight and everything else, and then they figured out which 2 shades would make that mowing pattern that's in the infield and the outfield, and it looks great. And again, it's one of those things that again, it's an investment, as this ownership group said that they were going to do, make an investment into the ballpark, into the fan experience, everything else. It's a big league ballpark. It's a big league baseball team, and as a lot of ballparks that have natural grass, you get to August, September, and it's brown in patches. You know where the right fielder stands most days. You're not going to have that. It's going to look just pristine from day one till the final day of the season. So good on the Marlins to do that.
Another benefit to it also is, now in the past with grass, the Marlins have to be very careful about having too many high school or college games in the field, or inviting too many fans down to the field, whether it's pregame or postgame for catches and special events like that. Now with this synthetic grass surface, you can do more of that stuff. You can host other non-baseball events in the ballpark without having to worry about the field, whether it's a concert or any other kind of event. So this opens up a lot of new avenues for the Marlins in terms of using the ballpark and getting more people down onto that field.
Right. One more. We just got this question on YouTube. A question for both of you from Mr. Freezing. Do you plan on continuing Sev Geff Live once baseball is back? We have no idea. We have no idea. Let's cross that bridge when we get to it. We're having fun with it now. I know that, and again, this is kind of how we'll sign off here. We are all hungry for baseball. We're all hungry for some form of normalcy when it comes to life. But right now, baseball has to take a back seat. We're all dealing with it in our own different ways. But think of more than just yourself. Think of staying home and staying healthy and staying safe, so that we can get, as a country, as one collective unit, get this thing under control.
And we're grateful to everybody who's tuned in. We're particularly grateful to those of you who have subscribed on YouTube, to those of you who have followed our Twitter page or liked our page on Facebook. We're looking at some opportunities. Do I know about this? We're looking at some. We've talked about. We're looking at some opportunities, maybe, to do some unique things to the folks who have subscribed on YouTube, who follow us on Facebook and Twitter, looking at maybe some exclusive opportunities with Sev Geff. So we'll see how this all plays out in an era of social distancing. But again, if you haven't subscribed already, please do so. If you haven't followed us on Twitter and liked our page on Facebook, please do so. And we'll hope to keep this content coming to you.
All right, excellent. Speaking of content, lots of different things. Quick reminders that 940 Wins is on Tuesdays and Thursdays doing the Marlins Rewinds, Fox Sports Florida. I think it's noon every day and sometimes 8 o'clock at night too, but you can check your local listings for the games and check the social media channels for when and what games those are. We've been live tweeting. I think I've got, whenever the 8th is, I think I've got a Wednesday live tweeting thing coming up with a Marlins game on Fox Sports Florida, so look forward to that. Obviously, again, just to clarify for those, so when we go live, the links come out on the Sev Geff Live Twitter handle to Periscope. If you want to watch it, just click and watch it from there. You can do that. If you want to watch it live on YouTube, that some of you are doing right now, you can click there. There's usually 2 separate tweets that have the 2 links. And you can always watch everything on YouTube, on the YouTube channel, which will also have our programming note, SGL shorts, and now that we've started this this hit and run segment, we'll be clipping those off too. So again, we hope that you can kind of stick through the whole show, but if you can't, we get it, and that's another opportunity for you to see some of what we're doing, Geff.
Yeah, thanks again to Dave. He was great, gave us a ton of time and so many great stories today. And thanks everybody else who joined us.
All right, fun. We appreciate it. Stay in touch. We'll be in touch as to when our next broadcast will be. Sev Geff Live, signing off. Thanks, everybody.